Hi, I'm Charlie. Thank you for spending a little time with me today. Every story I share comes from a moment that changed how I understood myself, my family, or the world around me. Today's story is one I'll never forget because it starts with a birthday cake, a borrowed dress, and a silence in my mother's kitchen that taught me more about love than any conversation ever could. I still remember the day it began, though at the time I didn't understand that it was a beginning at all. I was turning 10, and my mother had promised me a party in the backyard with a piñata shaped like a dinosaur and a cake with blue frosting, because blue was my favorite color that year. The way favorite colors change every few months when you're a kid, and the whole world still feels like it's made of firsts. We lived in a small house on a street called Larkspur, in a town where everyone knew everyone, where the mail carrier waved from his little white truck, and the Fergusons next door always had their sprinkler running too long, so the sidewalk stayed damp all summer. My father worked at the hardware store downtown, the kind of place with creaky wooden floors and a bell above the door, and my mother stayed home with me and my older sister Renee, who was 13 that year and already beginning to seem impossibly grown up to me, with her own room, her own secrets, her own laugh that sounded different when she was on the phone with her friends than when she was talking to me. I was, by all outward appearances, an ordinary boy. That's the word everyone used. Ordinary. Sweet. A little quiet, maybe. Prone to daydreaming, prone to sitting a little too long in front of the television during the commercials for laundry detergent, because something about the way the actresses moved, the soft swish of fabric, the way a skirt would catch the light, made something in my chest go quiet and curious in a way I didn't have words for. I didn't think of it as anything. I was 10. I thought about dinosaurs and my bike and whether Danny Ostrovsky would be my friend again after our fight over the kickball rules. But I also remember, even then, a kind of quiet ache that I couldn't name, a sense that there was something about myself I hadn't found yet, tucked away somewhere behind my ribs, waiting. The morning of my birthday, my mother let me pick out the balloons at the store, and I chose them not by color exactly, but by shine, by the way the light bounced off the silver ones and made little rainbows on the ceiling of the car on the drive home. Renee sat beside me in the back seat, working on something with a needle and thread, and when I asked what it was, she held it up. It was a small drawstring bag, patchwork, made of scraps from an old quilt our grandmother had given her. "I'm making one for you too," she said, "for your birthday, but you can't see it yet." I remember feeling a warmth spread through me at that, the specific warmth of being thought of by someone older, someone whose attention felt like a kind of currency I was always trying to earn. The party itself unfolded the way parties do, in memory, in fragments rather than a single continuous scene. I remember the piñata splitting open and the scramble of kids diving for candy, my knees skidding on the grass. I remember my father flipping burgers at the grill, wearing an apron that said "Kiss the Cook" that Renee had given him as a joke 2 Christmases before. I remember my mother's laugh, easy and unguarded, the laugh she saved for days when nothing was wrong. And I remember the gift. It came near the end of the party, after most of the other kids had gone home and it was just family left, sitting in the fading gold light of early evening. My grandmother, my mother's mother, whom we called Nana Ruth, handed me a box wrapped in tissue paper with little cartoon stars on it. "This one's from me," she said. "Something special." Inside was a costume. Not a Halloween costume exactly, but a soft blue dress, the same shade of blue as my birthday cake, with small white buttons down the front and a sash that tied at the waist. Nana Ruth explained, a little sheepishly, that she'd found it at a craft fair, that the woman selling it made costumes for a children's theater group, and that she'd thought immediately of the school play Renee had told her about, the one where the whole class was doing a production of a story with a fairy godmother character, and how there'd been talk of needing more costumes for the younger siblings who wanted small parts. "I thought maybe you and your friends could use it for dress-up," she said. "You always did love dressing up as anyone at all, remember? The pirate, the wizard, the astronaut. I thought, why not a prince who turns into something magical?" I don't think Nana Ruth meant anything complicated by it. She wasn't trying to send a message. She'd simply seen a soft blue dress and thought of a child who loved costumes, who loved becoming someone else for an afternoon, the way so many children do. But I remember taking the dress out of the tissue paper, and I remember the way the fabric felt against my fingers, cool and slightly slippery, like water you could hold. And I remember a feeling that I can only describe now, all these years later, as recognition. Not excitement exactly, not even happiness in the way I'd felt about the balloons or the cake. Something quieter and stranger. Something that felt like meeting an old friend I hadn't known I was missing. My father cleared his throat in that particular way he had when he wasn't sure what to say. My mother's smile faltered for just a moment, so briefly that I almost didn't catch it, before she said brightly, "Well, isn't that lovely, Mom? Charlie loves dress up." And that was that. The moment passed. The adults moved on to coffee and the last slice of cake. Renee, sitting beside me, gave my shoulder a small nudge and whispered, "You should totally wear that to the play. You'd make a great fairy godmother." She said it kindly, the way older sisters sometimes surprise you with kindness when you least expect it, without any teasing in her voice at all. And I held on to that dress in my lap for the rest of the evening, running my thumb along the little white buttons, feeling something settle in my chest that I wouldn't understand for years. That night, after the guests had gone and the balloons had started their slow, sad droop toward the floor, I hung the dress in my closet, tucked behind my winter coat where I told myself I was hiding it from nobody in particular. And I lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, turning over the strange, warm feeling that had followed me all evening. I didn't have language for it. I was 10. I only knew that something about that dress had reached into a part of me I hadn't visited before, and had said, quietly, "There you are." For weeks after that, the dress stayed in my closet, and I would sometimes open the door just to look at it, the way you might check that a photograph is still there in a drawer, not because you doubt it, but because looking at it gives you a small, private comfort. I didn't try it on. I wasn't ready for that yet, whatever readiness even meant at 10 years old. But I liked knowing it was there. It was Renee who eventually asked me, on a rainy Saturday a month or so later, when our parents had gone to visit my aunt and left us home with strict instructions not to burn the house down making popcorn, whether I'd ever actually worn the dress Nana Ruth gave me. "No," I admitted. "It's just sitting in my closet." "Do you want to?" she asked, and there was no teasing in her voice, only the plain curiosity of a 13-year-old who genuinely wanted to know. I remember feeling my face go hot, feeling caught somehow, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. "I don't know," I said, which was the truth. I didn't know. I only knew that the question made my heart beat a little faster, in a way that felt like standing at the edge of a pool trying to decide whether the water was too cold. "You can if you want," Renee said, shrugging in that easy way older siblings have of making enormous things sound small. "I won't tell anyone. It's just us." And so, with the rain tapping steadily against my window and the house feeling warm and private in a way it rarely did, I brought the dress out of the closet, and Renee helped me with the buttons because my hands were shaking slightly, though I couldn't have told you if it was nerves or excitement or some tangled combination of both. And I stood in front of the mirror on the back of my closet door and looked at myself. I don't remember thinking anything dramatic. I didn't burst into tears or feel a lightning bolt of revelation. I remember, mostly, a kind of stillness, a quiet feeling of things being, for just a moment, correctly arranged. The blue of the fabric against my skin, the soft swish of the skirt when I turned. Renee, sitting cross-legged on my bed, watching with an expression I can only describe now as gentle and unsurprised, as if some part of her had already guessed something about me that I hadn't guessed about myself yet. "You look happy," she said simply. I did. I looked happy. I felt, for the length of that rainy Saturday afternoon, like I had stepped briefly into a version of myself I hadn't known was available to me. And the strangest part wasn't the dress at all. The strangest part was how natural it felt, how little like pretending, when pretending was supposedly the whole point. We didn't talk about it much after that day. Renee never brought it up unless I did first, and I didn't bring it up often, because I didn't yet have the words to explain what had happened in me. Only the memory of that stillness, that rightness, tucked away like a secret I was still learning the shape of. Childhood moved on the way it does, in seasons and school years, and I want to be honest with you and say that I didn't spend those years in some state of constant internal turmoil. Mostly I was just a kid. I played kickball with Danny Ostrovsky once we'd made up. I got a C in math and cried about it more than the grade probably warranted. I had a dog named Biscuit who slept at the foot of my bed and snored louder than my father. Life was ordinary, and I was, on the surface, an ordinary boy growing into an ordinary adolescence. But underneath that ordinariness, there was a quiet thread running through everything. A thread I followed sometimes without even meaning to. I noticed, more than the other boys seemed to, the cut of a woman's blouse in a store window. Not with any of the interest my friends were starting to develop as they entered their teenage years, but with a kind of longing that had nothing to do with attraction to someone else and everything to do with a private wish about myself. I noticed how certain colors seemed to belong to a version of me I hadn't fully met. I noticed the particular ache of watching my mother get ready for a dinner party, sitting at her vanity while she clipped in earrings and smoothed her hair, and feeling something in my chest twist with a longing I couldn't explain even to myself. I didn't have the vocabulary for any of this. This was a smaller town, a different decade, and nobody around me was talking about gender identity the way people do now. I only had the private language of my own feelings, half-formed and confusing, and the quiet blue dress hanging in my closet that I would occasionally, on evenings when the house was empty, take out and hold against myself, not even putting it on, just holding it, the way you might hold a photograph of someone you missed. The years unfolded like that, one after another, ordinary on the outside, quietly turning on the inside. I want to tell you about a particular afternoon in middle school, because it's one of those small moments that ended up meaning more than it should have, the way small moments often do when we look back on them years later. I was 12, and I'd developed a habit, when nobody was home, of going through the box in the hall closet where my mother kept clothes she was planning to donate. There was a floral skirt in there, one she'd worn when she was younger and had decided no longer fit the life she was living, and I would take it out sometimes and hold it, feeling that same familiar stillness settle over me. One afternoon, absorbed in this private ritual, I didn't hear my mother's car pull into the driveway. I didn't hear the front door. I looked up, and she was standing in the hallway, watching me, and my whole body went cold with the particular horror of a child caught doing something they don't fully understand themselves, something they can't explain, something that feels enormous and shameful, even though no one has ever told them it should be. I remember the silence stretching between us, long and terrible, and I remember bracing myself for something, though I couldn't have told you what. Anger, confusion, disappointment. My mother had never been an unkind woman, but I was 12, and shame doesn't care about a person's actual character. It just fills in the worst possibilities on its own. What she did instead was sit down on the hallway floor across from me, folding her legs beneath her the way she used to when I was small and she'd read to me before bed. And she said, "Tell me about it, whatever it is. I want to understand." I didn't have the words. I was 12. And even now, as an adult looking back with decades of reflection and language I didn't have then, I find it hard to fully capture what I was feeling in that hallway. But I tried. I told her, haltingly, that I didn't know why, that I just liked how it felt, that it wasn't about anything specific, just a feeling of being more like myself somehow. And I remember watching her face carefully as I spoke, terrified of what I might see there. What I saw was thoughtfulness. Not immediate understanding, not some perfect movie moment of acceptance, but the genuine effort of a mother trying to make room in her mind for something she hadn't expected, and didn't fully understand yet either. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay. Thank you for telling me." She didn't say much more than that, not that day. But she also didn't take the skirt away, and she didn't tell my father, at least not right away. And in the weeks that followed, I noticed small things. She started leaving certain items in the donation box a little longer before actually driving them to the thrift store. She began, without ever making a production of it, buying me clothes in colors and cuts that weren't strictly what a boy my age was expected to wear. Softer sweaters, certain shades of purple and blue that I gravitated toward without either of us naming why. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was quiet, incremental, the way real change in families usually is. But it told me something I needed to know, which was that I wasn't going to lose her over this, whatever this turned out to be. High school brought its own complications, as high school does for everyone. I want to be honest that there were harder years too. Years where I tried very hard to fold myself into a shape that felt safer, more expected. I played baseball for 2 seasons, not because I loved it, but because I thought maybe if I did enough of the things that were supposed to make me feel like an ordinary boy, the quiet ache underneath would go away on its own. It didn't, of course. It just went quieter, waiting. There was a boy in my grade, Marcus Webb, who found out somehow, I never learned exactly how, about that childhood habit of mine, some garbled secondhand version of a story that had traveled through the grapevine of teenage cruelty until it barely resembled the truth. And for a stretch of my sophomore year, he made it his particular project to make my life difficult. I won't dwell on those months longer than I need to, because this isn't a story about cruelty. It's a story about a birthday, and a family, and the slow unfolding of self-understanding. But I mention Marcus because those months taught me something important too, which was how much I needed the people who loved me, and how much their steadiness mattered when the world outside our house felt sharp and unkind. Renee, by then away at college but calling home every Sunday, was the one who told me something during one of those hard months that I've carried with me ever since. I was crying on the phone, though I tried to hide it, telling her I just wanted to be normal, that I wished I could turn off whatever this was in me. And she was quiet for a long moment before she said, "You know what I remember most about that day with the blue dress? You looked happy, Charlie. Really happy. Not performing happy, not trying to be someone else happy. Just happy. I don't think you should spend your whole life running from the thing that made you feel like that." I didn't have an answer for her then. I was 16 and scared and tired in the particular way that comes from holding something heavy for a long time without setting it down. But her words stayed with me, tucked into the same quiet place where I kept the memory of that rainy Saturday afternoon. The years after high school brought slow, steady change. The kind that doesn't make for dramatic storytelling, but that I think is closer to how real self-discovery actually happens for most of us. I moved to a bigger city for college, a place where I could reinvent myself a little, where nobody knew the boy who'd played baseball for 2 seasons he hadn't wanted. And it was there that I finally started to let myself explore. Tentatively at first, and then with growing confidence, the parts of myself I'd been keeping folded away since I was 10 years old. I remember the first time I bought clothes for myself, actually for myself, not borrowed from a donation box or hidden in the back of a closet. It was a soft green cardigan from a shop near my dormitory. Nothing elaborate, nothing that would have drawn a second glance from a stranger on the street. But I remember standing in the fitting room and feeling that same stillness I'd felt at 10 years old in front of my closet mirror. That same sense of things being, for once, correctly arranged. I found a small community, eventually, of people who understood pieces of what I was carrying. Some who had walked further down this particular road than I had, some who were just beginning to find their own footing the way I was. I learned words I hadn't had before. I learned that what I'd felt as a child wasn't strange or shameful, that there were whole histories and communities of people who had felt something similar, who had found their own ways of making peace with it. I want to tell you that everything unfolded smoothly from there, but that wouldn't be honest. And I promised myself a long time ago that if I was going to share these stories, I'd share them honestly. There were setbacks. There were nights of doubt, moments where the old fear crept back in, where I wondered if I was making a mistake, if I was disappointing the people who loved me, if the safest thing wouldn't be to simply fold myself back into the smaller shape I'd worn for so many years. It was my mother, of all people, who helped me through one of the hardest of those nights. I'd come home for a visit during my junior year of college, and something in my face must have given away the weight I was carrying, because she sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten that blue birthday cake so many years before, and she said, "I've been thinking about that day you turned 10. Your grandmother gave you that dress, do you remember?" I told her I remembered it perfectly. I was so afraid that day, she admitted, which surprised me because I'd never heard her describe herself as afraid of anything. I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't know how to be the kind of mother who'd know the right thing to say. I think I was so afraid of getting it wrong that I almost missed the chance to get it right. "You didn't get it wrong," I told her, and I meant it. "You let me keep the dress. You didn't take it away." "I almost did," she confessed. "I stood outside your room that night after everyone had gone to bed, and I almost went in and took it because I didn't know what else to do with my fear. But something stopped me. I think some part of me already knew, even then, that whatever was in you was going to need room to grow, and that my job wasn't to decide what shape you'd become. My job was just to make sure you always had a home to come back to, whatever shape that turned out to be." I cried at that kitchen table in a way I hadn't cried in years. Not from sadness, but from a kind of relief so deep it felt like setting down a weight I'd been carrying since I was 10 years old, without even realizing how heavy it had gotten. The years since then have carried their own chapters, their own smaller turning points, each one building on the last, the way stairs build a staircase. One step never enough on its own to get you anywhere, but each one necessary. I found my way, slowly, into a version of myself that felt honest. I learned how to dress in ways that reflected who I actually was rather than who I'd been told to be. I learned that self-expression through clothing wasn't frivolous or shameful, but was, for me, a genuine form of communication with the world, a way of saying, quietly but clearly, "This is who I am." My relationship with my father took longer to find its footing, and I want to be honest about that too, because not every relationship heals on the same timeline, and that's its own kind of truth worth telling. He struggled for a long time with words, with understanding, with the particular discomfort of a man who'd grown up believing certain things about what it meant to raise a son. But he never once, even in his most confused moments, stopped showing up. He came to my college graduation. He asked, awkwardly but sincerely, about the parts of my life he didn't fully understand, because he wanted to understand them anyway, for my sake, if not entirely for his own. Love, I've learned, doesn't always arrive polished and articulate. Sometimes it arrives clumsy and trying, and that trying is its own kind of gift. Renee, true to the girl who'd handed me that patchwork bag on the drive home from the party store all those years ago, remained one of the steadiest presences in my life through every stage of this journey. She was the one who came with me to buy my first dress as an adult, the two of us standing in a fitting room, not so different from that rainy Saturday afternoon bedroom. Except now I wasn't 10 years old borrowing a costume from a craft fair. I was a grown person choosing, deliberately and joyfully, a piece of clothing that reflected who I actually was. She cried a little that day, and when I asked her why, she said, "I've just been waiting so long to see you get to be all the way yourself." I think about that blue dress often, the one Nana Ruth gave me for my 10th birthday, not knowing what door she was quietly opening. I don't have it anymore. It didn't survive all the moves and years, though I sometimes wish I'd kept it, the way you wish you'd kept a photograph you didn't realize would matter until it was already gone. But I've kept its memory carefully, because it marks the beginning of something that took decades to fully unfold, a thread that started with a single moment of recognition in front of a closet mirror and grew, slowly and unevenly and honestly, into the life I live now. If there's one thing I've learned from that birthday and everything that followed, it's that self-discovery rarely arrives as a single dramatic moment, no matter how much movies and stories might suggest otherwise. It arrives in small pieces, scattered across years, hidden inside ordinary afternoons and rainy Saturdays and kitchen table conversations. It arrives through the people who choose, again and again, to make room for you even when they don't fully understand what they're making room for. It arrives through your own slow, patient willingness to keep listening to that quiet stillness inside yourself, even when the world outside is loud with other expectations. I think about Nana Ruth sometimes too, and I wonder if she ever guessed what she'd started with that soft blue dress from the craft fair. I never got the chance to tell her, not directly, not in words she would have fully understood, because she passed away before I found my way to living openly as myself. But I like to think that somewhere she knows. I like to think that the woman who saw a child who loved dressing up as anyone at all, and who simply wanted to give that child something soft and blue and beautiful, understood more than any of us realized at the time. Thank you for listening to my story. If something in my journey reminded you of your own, I hope you remember that growth often begins with the smallest moments: a borrowed dress, a sister's quiet kindness, a mother sitting down on a hallway floor to listen. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you again in the next story. I'm Charlie.